Hey guys, Matt, IronTrap Garage, and we are back working on the 32 Roadster project. So in the last video was a huge one. We finally got an engine and trans and everything back in this car, and we were working our way towards making this thing roadworthy. So one thing we need to work on is the gas tank situation. So this car originally had a gas tank that was modified in it, which we still have in here, or a spare one rather. We have one in here that actually had a brazed on neck that allowed you to thread a cap on and tighten it and pressurize the system so they could use a hand pump on it. While I may not hook up the hand pump because it's not very practical, we still want to hook up the gas cap because that is a big part of the car's identity, is that little gas cap that is very similar to the Doane Spencer car, which is I think a really neat thing, as well as this tail panel here that they made, the roll pan if you want to call it that, is the same, looks very similar. So today what we're going to be working on is I have a original gas tank that is in very good condition that we're going to modify to have a neck that we scavenged off the original tank that came in the car, and we're going to pull off this tail pan here, and we're going to clean it up. I have some black lacquer paint, so I'm going to actually be spraying this with some black lacquer to get it looking just a little bit better, and we're going to kind of take a look closer at this license plate setup and what they did in here to see exactly how that was all put together, and hopefully get the gas tank in, get the pan back on looking better, and we'll be ready to run our fuel lines in this car by the end of the video, which means we can make some noise with this car very soon. So let's get started. Alright, so I have this little pan just kind of setting on here, but it slides under the body. Fits around the tank there, and then there is a bumper, there's a spreader bar that goes in between the frame here, and that supports it, as well as there was two little bumperettes, if you want to call them that, or Nerf bars that stuck out. So we're going to pull this tank out. This is one that came with the car. There was another one that had a thread-on neck on it, so it must have been a kind of common thing to do, to have multiple gas tanks like that. So this one was in better shape, but it's still very crusty inside, so I'm just going to probably keep this tank around for mock-up purposes. So pull that guy out. Alright, so I got this tank out. We're just kind of looking at it. One thing we need to do is this car has a Stuart Warner gas gauge in it, along with a full row of Stuart Warner gauges, which is super badass. This gas tank is already, this extra one we have here has already been modified for a Stuart Warner sender. So I pulled this out. You can see it's very rough, but this is exactly what we need to put in our other stock gas tanks. So you can see what they did is they actually made an adapter here that they welded in to this tank, and then they led it around it or whatever, soldered around it to get it so it didn't leak. So we're going to be basically doing the same thing in our non-rusty tanks. So I'm going to take a look at it, but we may actually heat up the lead here and extract this little piece that was in here, because it's already made and saves us a little bit of hassle. But very tight fit, but it does fit in nicely, and it had all the holes lined up so you could just run it in there without a problem. So very cool, and kind of neat to reuse some of the old hot rod parts that were on this tank originally. So I'm going to grab the other new tank, set it on some stands, and see what we're looking at, and we'll start mocking stuff up. There we go. That's all it was. Piece of copper or brass that they just soldered on. Now we're going to take a terrifically good stock 32 tank and F it all up. Just like they would have done in the place. Now I'm sweating. Exactly what they did. Stuck up right there. Yeah, it's so thick I'm having trouble getting heat into it to even melt the filler rod onto it.
Right.
First time anybody's seen that piece of metal in a very long time. So I got the rear cover on the stand here. We have the gas tank all welded up. Steve's leak testing it as we speak. And then we're going to be ready to get that thing in some paint. So this is the rear cover that was made back in the day and is pretty much one of the really distinguishing features of this car. And you can see what they did is they took, these are actually frame horn covers on the back here that they welded up So the original one probably went somewhere right around here, and they made this piece here that welded in with the nice rolled edges with the sunken in license plate. It may have at some time, we don't know, it could have possibly had a piece of glass in there. That's something we would see on those early customs. But this part just slips over top, and since they're using factory parts here, you can see that all the bolt holes are there to just mount it back on. The tray, they made a nice little tray for the license plate. I don't know if they remade this when they put the Michigan license plate in it, or maybe it was basically the same size as the Cali one that was on it. Not quite sure, but they got these little lights in each corner. So this thing's pretty cool and very well made. So I'm going to try to kind of save as much as I can. I'll spray some coil or something on these different bolts, try to get it all apart, and I'm going to sand this thing all up and get it ready so that we can rust proof it and also paint it and get it looking good with some black lacquer. Sneak this wiring out of here. So got this whole tray that's made in one piece. And you see those little bulbs hidden in there. And it looks like this Michigan plate is a little smaller than possibly the Cali plate that might have been in there. But this thing definitely needs some cleaning up. We got to get the plate out of there and probably give it a blast. But we're mainly worried about getting this rear cover cleaned up and back on the car. Try and dissect this the best we can. Didn't work?
No, I just gotta take a little off the spring. A little too long.
There we go. We're gonna have to restore the license plate. Oh my god. This tray also doubled as a rust catcher.
Yeah, that license plate might come off because it's dust.
It's still there.
Oof, yeah. Oof.
Barely.
Uh-huh.
I'm almost scared to blast it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll have Mike, oh look,
It's got a little on the back yet.
the backside's still decent.
Uh-huh. That's a
we,
nice
can
blue.
we can match that blue then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a nice blue.
But I might have to, maybe I can get Mike to dip it. Oh, it looks like it's yellow
Oh yeah?
underneath. Yeah. All right, so Steve's working on checking some of the old gauges that were in the dash. So this is the oil pressure gauge, old store Warner Wings gauge, and we're just gonna push a little bit of shop air to it just to see if the gauge moves. Kind of, oh yeah, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
That one's good.
Functional.
Yes. So now we're gonna go over and check. This still has all the gauges in it, but the temperature gauge probe is still hanging right here. And you can see there's a water temp gauge right there. So we're going to check that, see if that works. There's also a vacuum gauge. We can take our vacuum pump and see if that will work. And that's at least some of the gauges. I'm going to guess that the fuel sender or the fuel level gauge is probably no good. Most of the times we've run into, these do not fare as well as some of the other gauges. So Steve's got the heat gun over there, and he's going to use the heat gun because his mechanical gauge has just got that probe on it. Let me zoom in here. You should see it start rising pretty quickly. There it goes. It's moving.
Heck yeah.
Going up, up, up.
Yeah, it jumped right up.
Yep. That gauge is fairly responsive, so we could probably, for now, consider that good. We should probably also test this. This is the fuel pressure gauge, so we can probably test that as well, just to see if that one works. I don't know if we're going to use that or not with the hand pump, but that's another one. But we're also definitely going to test this vacuum gauge, so we can hook that up to the manifold vacuum, and we can check that.
All right, the other one.
All right, so Steve stole this, grabbed it out of the dash, trying to get around that, and then he's got a little vacuum gauge. We finally bought one of these, and we're gonna test this old Stuart Warner vacuum gauge. There we go. Oh yeah,
It's holding.
good.
Perfect.
So we can hook that sucker up, and that should be good.
Mm-hmm.
Another good one.
Yeah, you gotta go up to the second hole on that side.
You could still get that center on there.
All right, so after getting this panel on, I've been working on what I'm going to call shitifying it. Some people do fake patina, whatever you want to call it, but I'm just making it kind of look crappy or shitty to match the car. The tough part is the black lacquer itself, and I kind of learned from, I guess, a couple of older guys had kind of told me that black lacquer is kind of black lacquer. It's not as different as modern day paints, where you can have all kinds of different tints in it. Generally, like a jet black lacquer is all going to be pretty close. So we got the black lacquer kind of matches everything else as far as like the tone or the hue of the black is concerned, but obviously it's too shiny, number one, and it was like too perfect, and it looked odd that you had this panel that was, you know, painted with no primer showing through or anything, and the rest of the car has chips and scratches. And I'm not trying to fake anyone. I just want the whole car to kind of look natural and look like it was stored better than it was, and have some age to it, but not be falling apart. That's kind of the goal with what I do with these like survivor cars. So what I'm doing is I went over it. I have like a worn out green scuff pad. You have to be kind of careful with using scuff pad or sandpaper. If you get too crazy, you're gonna have all kinds of obvious scratches in it where it would look like you were sanding it. I already kind of have that a little bit, but I've been trying to find a method to make that look a little less obvious. When you get right up on it, of course, you probably can tell that it's been doctored up a little bit, but we just, again, driving down the street, want everything to kind of look the same. So what I've been doing is trying to looking at the car of where there's a lot of damage and different stuff like that and try and match it. So the gas cap area was one thing that I just did, and I thought I'd stop and film it. The gas cap area was too clean. I mean, obviously you're gonna spill gas. It's gonna go down on the lacquer paint. Lacquer paint is not very chemical resistant, so it makes it nice for trying to make it look old. Also not good for it if you drip fuel or whatever. So what I'm doing is I just have some Eastwood chassis clean. This stuff's pretty serious. It works really well for degreasing. It also works really well for kind of dissolving and shitifying old lacquer paint. So what I'm doing is basically I take a little spray of it on my worn out Scotch-Brite and it like dissolves the lacquer very quickly. So what I do is I kind of just rub it in. You'll see it start to melt, and I'm kind of just almost making it like it was running. This is where you're using your art project, and I want to almost go down to some bare metal here, and almost. And then what I do is take the rag and kind of rub it all in to make it, try and get rid of some of the scratches, and we'll kind of blend it all out. But just, so that's kind of what I'm doing. And then what happens is after it kind of dries, that area where there was some of that brake clean on it that didn't dissolve, it kind of starts to make it shiny again, bring some of the shine back. So I've been going back with a dry rag, a dry part of the scuff pad, and just kind of like bring it together, so to speak. You just want to make sure you don't touch an area that you... So kind of been doing this just in certain areas and trying to make it pretty worn. This panel had like no paint on it at all, and it was very scaly. So if I left this thing alone, the whole idea, somebody might say, well, you left the rest of the car. This particular panel was so scaly and rough, I was kind of worried just leaving it as it was over time, it's gonna just get much, much worse and be paper thin. So it was still savable. A couple spots have little tiny pinholes and knock some dents out, but it's really not that bad. It's kind of surprising that this panel isn't worse considering it was sitting kind of close to the ground. But we were able to save it. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I did an area up here where I dissolved some of the paint. Like I'm gonna go over in this corner over here. There's some obvious area where it was very wet down in this area of the car, so there's some moisture. So we want to kind of get into the primer and almost into the paint. And the nice thing with this is you can kind of rub it a little bit and it'll start to dissolve. And as long as you don't push real hard, it won't go too quick. But I kind of just rub it in with a dry rag. And really don't think about it too much. It's totally random, just like the way a car rusts. So exactly what I'm trying to do. No magic to this. Again, not trying to fool anybody, just make it look, not stand out that we painted the whole panel once it gets some dirt and crap on it. So I'm gonna keep working on this a little bit more. I'm just about, I think, happy with it for now. A lot of it's gonna be just drive the crap out of it and get dirt on it and let it sit here in the shop and don't cover the car and let grinding dust and whatever. I found that's sometimes the best way to age this stuff, is just let it sit here and get grinding dust and dirt on it, and stuff starts to age in. The grill was the same way. I kind of aged it a little bit and then it was still a little off. And as soon as we left it in here for a couple of weeks, all of a sudden it started really looking good. So that's what we're gonna do. So I'll work on this a little bit more and we'll be all pretty much finished for this project. All right, so we got the rear cover, kind of made it a little more crappy than it was, and now it looks kind of the part. A lot of this, as I mentioned earlier, is just letting the car age and driving the crap out of it. We just kind of made it hopefully not stand out as much. I didn't do any rhyme or reason, just kind of went over it and started the process. So we're gonna let this thing sit around the shop as we work on it, get dirty, dusty, whatever, and it'll age in very nicely as we drive the car. But most importantly, we have something that is primed on the inside. It was cleaned and blasted and cleaned on the inside, so that we've stopped all the major rot or rust on the car. So the car will not get any worse, so to speak. It can just be preserved. So that's the whole idea with this project. I know this especially is going to cause some controversy on the channel. This car in general seems to cause a lot of controversy because people are very angry that I'm not making this perfect street rod, and not everybody gets the whole idea of preservation of an original hot rod built back in the day, and to treat it as a survivor as it is. So that's what we're trying to do. That's what I'm doing with my car. Like it or not, this is what we did. We have a good gas tank in the car now that is all modified. We cut a hole in the trunk so that we could get to pulling the fuel sender in and out, so that's all good. So Steve can work on getting the new Stuart Warner fuel sender in there, and then we could start testing the old Stuart Warner gauge that's in the dash, see if it needs to be restored or if it'll work as is. Fingers crossed, it'll still work. Steve's already gotten a lot of the gauges hooked up, and I'll take you around and show you. He's been working on bunch of stuff in the engine bay while I was working on this project. Steve was working on getting things kind of hooked up. We have the gas pedal is all hooked up. We opted for putting an original style floorboard back in it. It had a floorboard with a big hump in it that I still think this car at some point had an overhead valve engine, but we can't 100% prove it with photos. So Steve put an original type floorboard back in so we can run an original gas pedal. He's already run, you can see the lines right there. He's already run the coolant temperature gauge, oil pressure gauge, and a vacuum line out a hole in the bottom of the firewall. And we're trying to use mainly old type. This copper nickel line is really good for this type of thing. This is some original line that we had, and he's using some of this copper nickel that'll age in. But yeah, so moving along in this car, and probably next will be plumbing it and all that type of stuff. So thank you guys for following along. Let me know what you think of the gas tank cover that we did on the car and the gas tank, and how the DeLorean Roadster is coming along. Thanks guys, catch you later.